She was 7 years old, and she gave him the only thing she had. A peppermint stick she'd been saving all week. She pulled it from her coat pocket and held it up to a boy standing on a crate with a rope around his waist and said, "Here, it's peppermint. It's really good." And that boy, who hadn't felt anything in years, reached out with cracked, frozen fingers and took it. And something behind his empty eyes moved, just barely, like a candle in a room everyone thought was dark. On this channel, we tell the stories worth remembering, from the heart of the American West, where the bravest acts are often the smallest ones, and love is something a child teaches you before you even know you needed the lesson. The lesson. Sometimes the person who saves a life doesn't carry a rifle. Sometimes they're 7 years old and carrying a peppermint stick, like this video. Share it with someone who needs to believe people are still good. Subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. Thank you for being part of our community.
It was December 14th, 1887, in Burden Creek, Colorado. "Rosie, stop," Caleb said, grabbing her arm. "But, Daddy, they are hurting him." "I know, sweetheart. You stay right behind me, you hear?" Caleb moved through the crowd, his bad leg aching from an old war wound. The man holding the rope had a slick voice, the kind that sells lies with a smile. "He is a good worker," the man announced. "Barely eats, never complains. Who will start at $15? $15 for a human soul." The crowd just stood there. "20, someone hollered from the back. 20, someone. They were the same eyes Caleb had seen on dying men in the war. 30, Caleb said, his voice ringing out. Everyone turned to look. The man with the rope had a nasty scar running down his cheek. $30 from the gentleman. Do I hear 35? "I am not buying him," Caleb declared. "I am telling you to take that rope off of him before I do it for you." The air went still and heavy. The scarred man just smiled. "This boy is my legal ward. I have papers from a judge in Denver. I decide what happens to him. Guardians do not sell children like livestock. I am finding him a good work home," the man sneered. "He is already starving," Caleb said, nodding at the boy. "When was the last time he ate a real meal?" Before the man could answer, Rosie slipped past Caleb. She walked right up to the boy, pulled a peppermint stick from her pocket and held it up. "Here," she said. "It is really good." The boy stared down at her. For a second, a flicker of life appeared in his dead eyes. His raw, trembling hand reached out and took the candy. "Rosie, come back here," Caleb ordered. "He is cold, Daddy. He needs a coat." She did not move. She looked right at the scarred man and said, "You are mean to him. He is afraid of you." The man's smile vanished. "You had better teach your daughter some manners, Mackenzie." "How do you know my name?" Caleb asked. "Small town," the man said, tightening the rope. "Now, if you are not here to bid, get out of my way. Your business here is finished." "Says who?" "Says me." Caleb unstrapped the leather keeper on his pistol. He was not drawing it, but he was making a point. "You plan on shooting me over some stray?" The man laughed. "In front of your daughter and this whole town? I am going to ask you one last time to take that rope off the boy," Caleb said evenly. "After that, I will stop asking." The man, whose name was Slade, studied Caleb. He saw the gun, the limp from the war, and the look in Caleb's eyes that said he was not bluffing. "You will regret this, Mackenzie," Slade said, his voice low. He dropped the rope. The boy nearly collapsed, but Caleb caught him. The child felt like a bundle of sticks. "I will be back for what is mine," Slade promised. He then walked over to two armed men on horseback, and they all rode out of town. Caleb looked down at the child in his arms. He was covered in old bruises and fresh cuts. Around his neck were the purple marks of a man's fingers. Someone had tried to choke him. And recently. "Daddy," Rosie said, "can we take him home?" "It is not that simple, honey." "Why not?" Caleb paused. It was dangerous. Slade would be back, but he looked at his daughter and knew what he had to do. "Because he's wearing my only good coat now," Caleb said. "Let us get inside before we all freeze." As they reached their porch, their neighbor Clara Jennings swung the door open. "I saw the whole thing from my window," she said, pulling them in. "Caleb Thornton, you are either the bravest man in Colorado or the biggest fool." She got the boy seated by the fire and started warming up some broth. The boy sat stiff as a board, gripping the chair. "Do you have a name, son?" Caleb asked. The boy just stared at the floor. "Give him time," Clara said from the stove. "Time is what we might not have," Caleb replied. "Slade said he's coming back." "Maurice Slade is a devil," Clara said. "People whisper about his mine. Children go in, but they do not come out. But he has money and powerful friends, so nobody dares to cross him." "Well, somebody is crossing him now," Caleb said. "You have a daughter, Caleb," Clara warned. "Think about that." "I am thinking about her," he answered, looking at Rosie as she brought a wool blanket for the boy. "What kind of father would I be if I taught her to look away?" Clara had no answer for that. Rosie wrapped the blanket around the boy's shoulders. His whole body trembled not from the cold, but from a fear so deep it had become part of him. "I am Rosie," she said softly. "We have a ranch with a dog named Biscuit. He is old and fat, and he will sleep on your feet." The boy looked at her as if she were speaking a different language. "Do you like dogs?" Rosie asked. After a long moment, the boy whispered, "Never met one." "Never met a dog?" Rosie's eyes grew wide. "Daddy, we have to fix that. Biscuit is the best dog in the whole world." A tiny crack appeared on the boy's frozen face. It was not a smile, but it was the start of one. Clara brought a cup of broth. "Drink this slow," she warned. "Your stomach is not used to it." The boy lifted the cup with shaking hands. He took a single sip, and his eyes closed. In that moment, all the emptiness was replaced by a deep, desperate hunger that made Caleb's heart ache. He tried one more time. "What is your name, son?" The boy opened his eyes and looked at him. Caleb saw the boy's eyes shift from him to Rosie, then to Clara. He was doing that terrible math every hurt child knows by heart. "Is this real? How long will it last? What is the catch?" The boy's voice was a ghost. "Noah. Noah Ward. Mr. Slade will come for me, he always does. He has papers from a judge that say I am his property. Nobody owns another person. The judge says otherwise." "Well, that judge is a fool." Noah just shook his head. "You do not get it. Slade has 22 other children at that mine. If he gets angry with you, he will take it out on them. On my—" He stopped himself. "He will hurt the others." Caleb heard the word that got stuck in the boy's throat. "My brother? My sister?" It was someone specific. "Who is still up there, Noah?" The boy's jaw clenched tight. "I cannot tell you. If he finds out I talked, he will make things worse for them." "All right," Caleb said, holding up his hands. "You do not have to say a word. Not right now." The front door swung open, and in walked Dr. Agnes Whitfield, all silver hair and sharp eyes. She took one look at Noah, and her lips drew into a hard, thin line. "Clara had sent a boy to fetch me 5 minutes ago." She set her medical bag down. "Let me have a look at him. Be gentle, Doc. He is terrified. I have been gentle with scared children since before you were old enough to grow a beard, Caleb Thornton. Do not tell me how to do my job." Agnes pulled a chair close but did not touch the boy. "My name is Dr. Whitfield. I am just going to see where you are hurt. You tell me to stop, and I will stop. Do you understand? Noah gave a tiny nod. The checkup took 15 minutes. With every new bruise and scar she found, her face grew darker. When she was done, she helped Noah with his shirt and pulled Caleb outside the room. How bad is it? Agnes's voice was like ice. 3 ribs were cracked and healed wrong. Old rope burns are scarred deep into his wrists. I counted 37 lash marks on his back. His feet have been burned. And Caleb, someone choked that boy hard in the last week. The marks are still there. Can you write it all down? I have been documenting everything since I walked in. I will have 12 pages of proof. If this goes before a decent judge, Slade is finished. What if the judge is not decent? Then we are all in trouble. Back inside, Rosie was sitting next to Noah. Do you know about Christmas? She asked him. I know what it is. Do you get presents? No. My daddy gets me one every year. This year, I am going to ask for a brother. The room fell silent. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest. Noah just stared at Rosie. You do not want me. Mr. Slade says I am nothing but trouble. That is why my own folks left me. Mr. Slade is a liar, Rosie declared. My daddy knows everything. Right, Daddy? Caleb looked at his 7-year-old daughter, who had his late wife Martha's fire in her. Then he looked at Noah, a boy sold like cattle just an hour before. An old voice in his head whispered to stay safe, to not love anyone else who could be taken away. But then he heard Martha's voice clear as day. You just have to show up, Caleb. No, Caleb said softly. I do not know everything. But I know you are not trouble, Noah, and I know that man had no right to hurt you. You are coming home with us tonight. Noah's cup fell from his shaking hands. What? You heard me. But what about Slade? His men? His guns? The law is on his side. I have got a warm bed and a dog who will keep your feet warm, Caleb said, holding out his hand. Is that enough for now? Noah stared at that hand. Every hand ever offered to him had been a trap. Every promise had been a lie. Rosie put her little hand on top of her father's. We are nice people, I promise. Daddy burns the biscuits sometimes, but we are nice. I do not burn them that often, Caleb protested. You did it yesterday and on Tuesday. The stove is just too hot, Clara grunted from her chair. The stove is fine, you just cannot cook. Just then the corner of Noah's mouth twitched. It was not a smile, but it was something. A single brick shifting in the wall he had built around himself. He slowly reached out and placed his trembling, ice-cold hand in Caleb's. Caleb wrapped his fingers gently around the boy's. All right then, he said. Let us go home. Clara had already bundled up a coat, boots, and a hat from her donation box. She dressed Noah with practiced hands. This coat is good wool. It will keep you warm. The boots might be a little big, but we can fix that. Noah accepted each piece like it was treasure. As Clara buttoned up the coat, his eyes started to well up. Nobody has ever... His voice trailed off. Well, someone is now, Clara said gruffly. And if that snake Slade comes to my door, he will meet my cast-iron skillet. You can tell him I said that. Dr. Agnes gave Caleb a folded paper. My first notes. The full report will be ready in the morning. Caleb, what you are doing is the right thing, but this is going to get real ugly. It already is ugly. It is going to get worse. Slade will not give up this boy. Neither will I. Outside, fresh snow was covering the tracks Slade had left behind. Caleb lifted Rosie into the wagon, then turned to help Noah. The boy's legs gave out on the step, and Caleb had to lift him up. He weighed next to nothing. Rosie pulled a heavy blanket over both their laps. Biscuit is our dog. He is going to love you, she said. I have never had a dog before. You do now, Caleb said, and clicked the reins. The wagon moved forward, leaving Burden Creek behind them. They rode in silence for a time, the world white and quiet. Noah sat stiff as a board, his eyes scanning the empty plains like a hunted animal. Noah, yes, sir. You do not need to call me sir. Caleb will do just fine. Yes, Caleb, that is better. The snow fell harder. The wagon wheels creaked. Caleb. Yeah? That man, Slade, he is going to come for me. I know. He will not be alone. I know that too. He has those legal papers. You cannot fight papers signed by a judge. Watch me." Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then so low Caleb could barely hear him over the wind, he said, "I have a brother." Caleb's hands tightened on the leather reins. "Tell me about him. His name is Eli. He is 13. He is still at the mine. We will get him out too. You cannot promise that." "I just did," Caleb said, turning to look at the boy whose face was wet with tears in the falling snow. "I've failed folks I should have stood up for. I swore to myself that would never happen again. We are getting your brother back. You have my word on it." Noah stared right into him, searching for the trick, the lie that was sure to come. He found nothing. The boy turned his eyes back to the snowy road. His hand slid across the wagon seat and found Rosie's. She took it, weaving her fingers through his like it was second nature. And so they rode on, three souls bound by a choice made in a blink. Behind them, Burden Creek vanished. Ahead lay the ranch and a 13-year-old boy named Eli, alive in the dark of a mountain mine. Caleb wondered if he could keep his promise, if the law would help or hang them, if Slade would show up with lawyers or with guns. But his little girl was holding this boy's hand like family, and a kid who had forgotten how to hope had just trusted him. That was enough to start. The ranch appeared as the last light faded from the sky. Caleb stopped the wagon and helped Rosie down. She took off running, her voice calling for Biscuit, clear as a bell in the cold. The old hound dog came rambling around the house, fat and slow, his tail thumping a steady rhythm. He headed for Rosie, then caught a new scent and changed course. He planted himself before the wagon, looking up at Noah like he was conducting official business. Noah sat frozen on the bench. He just stared at the cabin and the barn, at the smoke winding from the chimney. He looked like a man dying of thirst who'd stumbled on a river and figured it had to be a mirage. Rosie said, "That is Biscuit. He will not bite. He hardly has enough teeth left." Caleb added, "He has plenty of teeth. He just does not use them on people. He tried to eat a pine cone last week. Well, that is business between him and that pine cone." Caleb reached up. "Come on down, son, before we all turn to ice." Noah climbed down, and his knees gave out the second he hit the ground, but Caleb caught him. Biscuit waddled over and pushed his nose into the boy's hand. Noah flinched, then went still. Slowly, his fingers uncurled and touched the dog's head. When Biscuit licked his wrist, Noah snatched his hand back like he had touched a hot stove. "He licked me," Rosie smiled. "That just means he likes you." "Why?" "Because you are likable. Come on." She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the little house. Caleb watched them go. Rosie was not half Noah's size, but had all the confidence pulling that broken kid into her world. She was her mother's daughter through and through. He unhitched the horses and fed them, taking his time on purpose. He wanted to give the boy a moment to breathe before he came inside with all his questions and worries. When he finally stepped in, the cabin was warm. Rosie had the fire built back up, a skill he taught her last winter. She was on the floor with Biscuit talking to Noah, who stood in the middle of the room just looking around. "That is Daddy's chair. That one is mine. You can use Mama's chair. She is in heaven and does not need it. My mama died when I was born. Daddy says she was the best person he ever knew. My mama died too. It was a fever. I was 5. Rosie nodded, real serious, like they were in the same awful club. "Does it hurt? I cannot remember her enough for it to hurt. I think that is worse." "Yeah." Rosie scratched the old dog's ear. "I do not remember mine either, but Daddy tells me stories. He says her laugh was real loud and that she burned cornbread even worse than he burns biscuits." "I heard that," Caleb said from the doorway. "Your mama was a wonderful cook. Clara says she burned everything. Clara talks too much." Caleb moved to the stove. "Noah, are you hungry?" The boy's eyes snapped to him, that instant guarded look. "I do not need much. I can have whatever is left over. Or nothing at all. That was just broth. That is not a real meal. Caleb grabbed the skillet. I am making eggs and bacon, and you are eating. That is not up for discussion. Yes, sir. What did I say about calling me sir? Sorry. Yes, Caleb, that is better. Rosie set out 3 plates. Her voice was full of wonder. 3. We have never had 3 plates before. The words hung in the quiet air. Caleb cracked eggs into the pan, his back to the room. His own throat felt too tight to speak. They ate together at the table. Noah sat in Martha's chair, which felt both right and terribly wrong. The boy ate slow and careful with every bite, like he was storing away fuel for a journey he might have to make. Rosie told him, "You do not have to eat slow, there is always more. Daddy has chickens." Noah looked at Caleb. Every day? Every single day? Something in the boy's face changed. The thought of food coming every day was from a world he no longer believed in. Caleb put his fork down. Noah, I am not going to crowd you tonight. You are worn out. But I want you to know this. When you are ready to talk, whatever you say, I will believe you. And I will help you. That is a promise. Noah just looked at him for a long moment, then gave a single nod and went back to his plate. After they ate, Rosie showed Noah the loft. Caleb could hear her little footsteps overhead. If you get scared in the night, just holler for Daddy. He always comes. I do not get scared. Everybody gets scared. Even Daddy does. No, he does not. He does. He just does not show it. Clara told me that is what being brave is. Doing what you have to do even when you are scared. There was a pause. Then Noah's quiet voice. I am scared all the time. That is okay. You are the bravest fella I have ever met. Down below, Caleb sat at the table. His 7-year-old daughter knew things. It had taken him 38 years to begin to understand. He checked his rifle over the door and the revolver on the table. Both were loaded. He checked the locks and shutters. Then he poured a whiskey and sat in the dark, listening. Slade would come. A man like Slade was not ruled by anger but by cold calculation, which made him far more dangerous. Caleb needed real help, and he needed it fast. He needed the doctor's report, the Reverend's word, and for Clara to find the courage to say in public what the whole town only whispered. He finished the whiskey, checked the locks again, and climbed the ladder. Noah was in the corner. The boy was awake, his eyes wide open in the dark, just like when Caleb first saw him. Can't sleep, Noah said. Mind if I join you? Caleb eased himself down, his old leg aching. A few feet away, Rosie was spread out like a 5-pointed star. She always sleep that big? Noah asked. Always has. A tiny thing taken up a whole dang bed. A flicker of a smile crossed Noah's face and vanished. Caleb? What if Slade gets the sheriff? Then we handle the sheriff. What if everyone's on his side? Caleb met the boy's gaze. Then it will be us against them, and we will be enough. Noah fell silent, his fingers picking at the blanket, a nervous habit Caleb recognized. Tell me what he does, son. Not tonight, Noah whispered. I just can't. All right, not tonight. But my brother Eli, he is why I am here. He picked a fight with a guard, a big one. He took the beating so I could get away. I heard his ribs crack, heard him yell, and I just ran. You did what he wanted, Caleb said, his own chest tight. I left him there. You survived. That is what he bought you with that beating. Noah pulled the blanket close. Eli is tough, way tougher than me. Slade put him in the hole for 3 days once. He came out singing just to spite him. Slade hated that he could never break him. Sounds like my kind of man, Caleb said. He kept me alive for 4 years. He would give me his own food, work my shifts when I was too sick. Well, then we owe him a debt. And I always pay what I owe. In the dim light, Noah's guarded eyes softened just a bit, like a crack letting a little hope shine through. No one ever came for us. We waited, thinking someone would care, but nobody did. I care, Caleb said simply. But why? We are just a couple of kids nobody ever wanted. My sister Annabelle was a kid nobody wanted. The words tumbled out of Caleb, heavy with dust. Our own father sold her when she was 10, just like a calf at market. I was 12, too little to do a thing about it. I spent 15 years looking for her and never found a trace. Noah was quiet for a long moment. Is she? I do not know. That is the part that eats at you. The not knowing. I could not save her. The wind howled outside. Is that why you helped me? Noah asked softly. Because of her? Her, and a lot of others I could not save, Caleb admitted. And because my Rosie asked me to bring you home. She has her mother's eyes. I never could say no to her mother, Martha. You must have loved her something fierce. More than anything. Some days, missing her feels like it will tear me right in half. Does it get better? Noah asked. No, but you get stronger, and you learn how to carry the weight. Noah pulled the blanket up. Caleb, thank you for the food in this bed. Son, you do not thank a man for things you ought to have had all along. Maybe so, but you were the only one, so thank you. Caleb waited until the boy was sound asleep before climbing down, his legs on fire. He sat watched by the stove all night. Morning came cold and gray. He had coffee on and bacon sizzling when he heard a horse. His hand found his rifle, but he relaxed when he saw it was Reverend James Calloway. The preacher was 60 years old, with the straight back of the Union soldier he once was. Morning, James. Caleb. Heard you stirred things up yesterday. News gets around. Clara's boy told me the whole story, Calloway said, stepping inside. Where is the boy? Upstairs. Finally getting some real rest. Calloway took a cup of coffee, his eyes holding the weight of old battles. Caleb, you know what you have done, do you not? Slade has got Judge Harlan in his pocket. He could have you jailed for taking the boy. He was selling him, James, right in the street with a rope on him, calling out bids. Calloway's hand froze. Like an animal at auction? 30 people just stood and watched. The Reverend put his cup down hard. Who saw it? Half the town. But they are too scared of Slade to talk. They might listen to their pastor, Calloway said, his jaw tight. I will talk to every single one. Then I am writing to Federal Marshal Wade Prescott in Denver. I served with his father. He will take my word. As for the judge, he is just a politician. We just need to make sure the wind blows our way. Just then, Noah came down the ladder. He saw Calloway and stopped dead in his tracks. It is all right, son, Caleb said. This is Reverend Calloway. He is a friend. The preacher just gave a slow nod. Morning, Noah. The boy slid into a chair, his eyes locked on Calloway. Are you a real preacher? He asked. For 30 years. Slade brought a preacher to the mine once, Noah said. He told us we were blessed to have a man like Slade providing for us. Calloway's face turned to stone. That man was no preacher. He was a fraud using the Lord's name for his own gain. How do I know you are not the same? Noah challenged. You do not, the Reverend said calmly. Not yet. But just like Caleb here, I aim to prove it to you. Noah thought on that for a second, then reached for a slice of bacon. Caleb saw his hands were steadier today. Then Rosie came down like a hurricane, landing right next to Noah as if he belonged there. Did you sleep good? She asked. I did, he said. Good, she declared. Daddy's snores did not keep you up. They shake the walls. I do not snore, Caleb grumbled, as Calloway hid a smile. Noah watched them, a student learning a new language made of warmth and teasing. Later, on the porch, Calloway got serious. I will ride to Denver, but you be ready, Caleb. Slade is not going to wait for the law. My rifle is always ready. Been that way since 1862. One more thing, the Reverend said. The boy. He is holding something back, more than just his brother. I can see it. Do not press him, but be ready. It ain't right what they did to that boy, Noah, but sometimes a good man's got to step up when things go wrong. This is a story about that kind of courage, and I reckon it'll make you ask what you'd do. At noon, Agnes showed up without even a knock. She dropped her bag and gave Caleb a thick envelope. A full medical report, 12 pages long. She said, "I've seen some bad things in my 15 years, but this is the worst. 37 lashes, broken ribs, burns on his feet, and starved near to death. Will it be enough for a judge?" she was asked. Agnes looked over at Noah, who was sitting small and quiet. "It will be for any judge who isn't blind. And if he is, I will make him see. That boy is carrying wounds you can't see, Caleb. He needs patience and a safe place." "He's found it," Caleb promised. Agnes nodded. "Martha always said you were the second most stubborn man in the whole state, right behind her. I'll be back in a couple of days to check on him. Keep his meals small. His body needs to get used to real food again." After she left, Caleb hid the report in a lockbox under the floor. Inside was $83, the ranch deed. And now, 12 pages that could either save a child or get them all killed. The day went by quietly. Noah did chores without being told, moving with a carefulness learned from years of trying to stay invisible. He fed the chickens, watching them with a strange look. Later in the barn, Rosie was introducing Noah to the horses. She pointed to a big bay. "That there is Copper, Daddy's horse. He is old and grumpy, just like him." Rosie smiled. "This white one is Ghost. She doesn't take to new people, but I bet she'll like you." Noah slowly reached out his hand, ready to pull back fast. The horse just sniffed his fingers gently. "See," Rosie said. "Animals always know if you are a good person." As Noah stroked the horse's soft nose, his hand was steady. That simple trust from an animal seemed to unlock something inside him. "Caleb," he said, his voice low, "there's something else. Down at that mine, there are other kids. Some are real little, 6 or 7 years old. They send them into the tightest spots." His voice was flat, like he was talking about the weather. "There is a girl, Sadie. She is 7, same as Rosie. Eli, my friend. He looks out for her. If Slade finds out I told you, he will not hurt me. He will hurt them. That is how he keeps everyone quiet. He goes after the ones you care about." A heavy silence fell over the corral. "Noah," Caleb said, his own voice steady. "Look at me." The boy turned, his eyes old and dry. "We are getting them all out. Eli, Sadie, every last one. That is not just talk, that is the plan." "But you are just one man," Noah whispered. "I am one man," Caleb said, "and I am about to have a whole lot of angry friends once they hear what you just told me." That night, Caleb sat and wrote 3 letters. One to the marshal, one to a lawyer in Denver, and one to a friend asking her to rally the folks in town who saw what Slade tried to do. Tomorrow, the real fight would start. As he sat in the quiet, he heard a soft sound from the loft. It was Noah crying in his sleep. They were small, broken sounds he was trying to hold back even in his dreams. Caleb climbed the ladder to the loft. Noah was curled up tight, and Rosie was next to him, rubbing his back. "He keeps saying a name," she whispered. "Eli. He keeps calling for Eli." Caleb sat on the other side of the boy and placed a hand on his shoulder. Slowly, the crying stopped. "Daddy," Rosie whispered in the dark, "we have to go get his brother." "We will, baby girl. I promise." She laid back down. "He cries every night, Daddy. He tries to be quiet. I think the only way it will stop is if Eli comes home." Caleb sat there between the 2 children, the weight of his promise settling on him like a heavy winter snow. 3 days later, Slade made his move. Caleb was out back when he heard the heavy wheels of a wagon coming up the road. He grabbed his rifle. "Noah, Rosie, get inside." The children ran into the cabin without a single question. Noah knew the sound of trouble all too well. 2 wagons pulled up. The first carried Slade and two of his hired guns, Virgil Hobbs and Dutch Perry. The second wagon held a small man in a city suit who looked terrified to be there. Slade got down from the wagon, slow and deliberate. "Morning, Mackenzie." "Get off my land," Caleb said, his voice like cold iron. "Now that is no way to be neighborly," Slade said with a smirk. He motioned to the man in the suit. "This is Mr. Leland Cross, an attorney. He has a court order for the boy." The lawyer, whose hands were shaking, stepped forward, holding a leather case. "Mr. Mackenzie, this is an official order for you to surrender the child, Noah Ward, to his legal guardian, Mr. Morai Slade. Failure to do so is a serious crime." "I know the law," Caleb cut him off. "Then you understand I understand you are on my property standing next to a man who tortures children. I understand you rode all this way to drag a 9-year-old boy back to 4 more years of misery. I understand all that just fine. Now you understand something." Caleb's voice dropped low. "That boy is not going anywhere." Slade just smiled. "You hear that, Mr. Cross? I believe the man just broke the law in front of 3 witnesses. Mackenzie." The lawyer's voice was shaky. "Please, sir, we don't want any trouble. Just give us the boy." "You don't want trouble?" Caleb's voice was low and hard. "Then why did you ride out here with a man who whips 9-year-olds until their backs are raw meat?" The lawyer went pale and looked over at Slade, who just kept on smiling. "The boy has a big imagination," Slade said. "Kids tell stories. I have seen the scars on his back. Well, kids get hurt on a working ranch. It is the nature of things. Your business is not ranching, it is slavery. My business is legal, signed and sealed by the court." The cabin door creaked open. Little footsteps crunched in the snow. It was Noah. "Noah, get back inside now." "No." The boy's voice was quiet but firm. He walked right past Caleb and planted himself between the two men. He was shaken like a leaf, but his chin was held high. "I am not going back, Mr. Slade." Slade's smile vanished. "Is that a fact, boy?" "I told them what you did. I told them about Samuel and Daniel and all of it. You told them lies. I told them the truth. And I will tell a judge the same thing." Slade took a step, but Caleb moved. Right in front of him, the rifle held steady. "That is close enough. You are making a big mistake, Mackenzie. I have the law on my side and a judge in Denver who will see you in chains. And I've got a doctor's report counting 37 lash marks on a 9-year-old boy's back. I have got a reverend on his way to Denver right now to talk to a federal marshal. And I have got a town full of folks who saw you try to sell this child in the street 3 days ago." For just a second, a crack appeared in Slade's calm look. He covered it up quick. "Nobody's going to testify against me." "Are you sure about that?" "The people in this town saw you put a rope on a child and call out prices. You think they're going to forget that?" Over on the wagon, Virgil Hobbs started to reach for his rifle. Caleb's eyes snapped to the movement. "Tell your man to keep his hands where I can see them. He is just getting comfortable. He can get comfortable with his hands on his knees, or he can get comfortable in the dirt. His choice." Slade gave a little nod, and Hobbs put his hands on his knees. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Mackenzie, a court order is a court order. If you have proof of something, you need to file a petition with the court. It is already done." The lawyer blinked. "Pardon me?" "I said it is already done. Filed it yesterday. A counter-petition for emergency custody, backed up by medical proof and eyewitnesses. I have got copies inside if you want to see them. It was a complete bluff. The letters were still sitting on his kitchen table, sealed and unsent. But Slade did not know that, and his lawyer sure did not." Slade looked Caleb up and down. You could see him weighing his chances. This was not the simple rancher he was expecting. This man was a fighter. "Let me make this simple," Slade said, leaning forward. "I have been running that mine for 6 years. I have had marshals and reporters asking questions before. They all went away. Some were persuaded to change their minds. Some just disappeared. Is that a threat? That is history. I am telling you how the world works. Let me tell you how this is gonna work." Caleb stepped right up to Slade, close enough to see the stitches in an old scar. You have 22 children in that mine. I know it, and the doctor knows it. By the end of the week, a federal marshal is going to know it too. You can bring your lawyers and your guns, but you are not getting this boy. Not today, not ever. You are just one man. I am one man with nothing left to lose. You ought to think about how dangerous that makes me. Slade's jaw went tight. For a long moment they just stood there, eye to eye in the snow. Then Slade turned to his lawyer. Mr. Cross, please note that Mr. Mackenzie refused to follow a court order. Noted, the lawyer said, scribbling fast. Slade looked back at Noah, who stood his ground, fists clenched. I will see you soon, boy, real soon. Noah's voice came out strong. You do not scare me anymore. For a second, a flash of pure ugliness crossed Slade's face. Then it was gone. He climbed onto his wagon. 1 week, Mackenzie, Slade yelled. The judge set a hearing for December 21st. Be there with that boy, or I will come get him myself. And I will not bring a lawyer next time. The wagons rolled away. Caleb finally let out a long breath. Noah was still standing there, trembling, now that it was all over. You should not have come outside, son, Caleb said gently. I had to. Why is that? Because if I hide from him now, I will be hiding from him forever. Caleb looked at the small boy, talking like a grown man. That was brave, Noah. It did not feel brave. It felt like I was going to be sick. Caleb smiled a little. That is exactly what brave feels like. The door flew open and Rosie ran out, grabbing Noah in a big hug. I heard it all. That man is horrible. He is coming back, Rosie. Then we will be ready for him. Noah looked at Caleb. 1 week is not much time. Then we better not waste any of it. Caleb rode into town that afternoon. At the telegraph office, he sent 2 messages, one to his friend in Denver, and one to a lawyer he had heard about. The operator's eyes went wide. You are really going after Mariah Slade? I surely am. But he has got friends everywhere. So do I. He stopped at Clara's store next. She was waiting on the porch. He showed up this morning, Caleb told her. Brought a lawyer with him. What do you need? I need witnesses. Everyone who was at that market and saw what he did. They are scared, Caleb. They should be. They should be scared of what happens if we let him keep doing this. Clara, he has got a 7-year-old girl in that mine, same age as your Rosie. Clara's face went hard as stone. What? Noah told me. Her name is Sadie. She works the tunnels that are too small for the other kids. Clara gripped the porch railing so hard her knuckles turned white. I will get your witnesses, and heaven help any man who tells me no. He found Agnes at her office. She poured him a cup of coffee without a word. Slade paid you a visit, she said. It is all over town. I need you in Denver, in front of the judge. When? December 21st. I will be there. Agnes took a sip of her coffee. Caleb, I did some checking. In the 6 years Slade has run that mine, not one single child has ever been seen leaving. They go in, but they do not come out. Either he is keeping them there, or they are buried on that mountain. I need to get up there and look at that site. If there are graves, I can prove it. But you would have to get past Slade's men. Then you get me past them. Caleb just stared at this 55-year-old woman, ready to ride into a den of wolves to dig for children's bones. My wife, Martha, would have liked you. Martha did like me, Agnes said softly. We had tea together every Thursday. She told me a lot of things she never told you. That is what women do, Caleb. We carry the parts y'all cannot. On the ride home, his mind was busy with plans. But a mile out, he saw it. An orange glow staining the night sky. Not the house, thank God. It was the barn. Flames clawed up the side, pouring black smoke into the air. Caleb spurred his horse, the sound of screaming animals pulling him forward. He heard Rosie yell his name, her voice choked with fear. He jumped from the saddle before the horse even stopped. Daddy, the barn! Noah is inside, she cried from the cabin door. He went for the horses. Caleb's blood ran cold. I tried to stop him. Caleb did not wait. He ran toward the blaze, the heat pushing him back. He tied a bandana over his face and plunged into the thick, blinding smoke. He could hear the panicked horses and Noah's ragged voice, coughing and pleading. "Come on, girl, move!" Caleb pushed through the chaos, following the sound to find Noah wrestling with the terrified mare. The boy was hauling back on the mare's halter with all his might, which was not a whole lot. Ghost's eyes were wide with fear, her hooves planted firm, refusing to budge. "Noah, get clear! I have got her! I am not leaving her!" There was no time to argue. Caleb grabbed the halter and pulled. His bad legs screamed in protest. A beam overhead splintered, and Noah threw himself across Ghost's neck to shield her. "Move, girl, please." Maybe it was Caleb's pull or Noah's cry, or the beam crashing down right where she had been, but the mare finally bolted forward. They stumbled out of the smoke and into the freezing night. Rosie had already let the other two horses out, just 7 years old, and she had walked into a burning barn to save them. She was Martha's girl, all right. They stood together and watched the barn burn. There was nothing to do. The whole structure caved in on itself, shooting a pillar of sparks up into the black sky. Noah was on his knees, coughing hard. Caleb knelt beside him. "Are you all right, son?" "Yeah." The boy's voice was hoarse from all the smoke. "The horses, all 3 are out, thanks to you. And Rosie, she got Copper and Penny." Caleb laid a hand on the boy's back. "I know, but running into a burning building like that was a fool move, Noah." The boy shot back. "You did the same thing. I'm a grown man, I'm allowed. That don't make it any less foolish." Caleb almost cracked a smile. That's when he spotted them in the snow. Boot prints. 2 sets, leading from the barn toward town. "Noah, I see 'em. This was no accident." Rosie stood by the horses, her arms wrapped tight around Penny's neck. "Daddy, somebody did this on purpose." "Yeah, baby doll. Somebody surely did." Mr. Slade. The name hung in the air, unspoken. They all knew. Noah stood up, his face lit by the fire. And what Caleb saw there wasn't fear. It was pure, cold rage, the kind of anger that grows in a child who's known nothing but hurt and has finally found something worth defending. "He thinks he can run us off," Noah said. "He's wrong. He burned our barn. I'll build another one. What if he comes for the cabin next? Then he'll find me waiting for him." Caleb straightened up. "Noah, you listen here. This is what Slade does. He pushes a man until he breaks. He finds what you love and he destroys it piece by piece until you've got nothing left to do but give in. It ain't gonna work on me." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've already lost everything once before. My wife, my kin, my best friend. I've hit the bottom, son. There's nothing left for a man like him to take. And I'm still here." Caleb's voice was steady as stone. "Slade can burn down everything I own and take every last dollar. He can bring this whole territory down on my head, but he can't make me quit." Noah looked at him, and that rage in his eyes started to mix with something new. Something that looked a whole lot like belief. "Caleb," he said. "Yeah? I need to tell you something about the mine. Something I ain't told nobody." "I'm listening." "There's a deep tunnel, shaft 7. Slade keeps his ledgers there. The names of every kid who's ever worked that mine, and where he buried the ones who didn't make it." Caleb stood frozen. "You're certain?" "I've seen the books myself. Eli showed me. He slipped in that night and found the proof. Ledgers full of names and dates stretching back 6 long years. We're talking dozens of names, Caleb. If we get our hands on those books, no judge could look away, not even a crooked one like Harlan." They stood there as the fire died down, snow drifting around them. 3 folks who ought to have been broken by life but stood tall instead, finding strength in each other. Rosie went and took Noah's hand. Then she reached for her father's. "Daddy." He looked at her. "We're going to that mine, aren't we?" Caleb gazed at his 7-year-old girl. She had her mother's eyes and her mother's steel backbone. Yeah, baby girl, he said. We sure are. He left before the sun was even thinking about rising. He checked the loaded rifle by the door and the revolver he'd left on the table for Clara. She'd come from town the night before with a shotgun, a basket of biscuits, and a look that said she was ready for a fight. You come back in one piece, Caleb Thornton, Clara had said from the rocking chair. I plan on it. Well, planning ain't doing. I've put 2 husbands in the ground. Don't you make me bury a friend. He rode out into the biting cold. The snow had let up, but the cold was the kind that settled deep in your bones. Marshal Wade Prescott was waiting for him 2 miles south of town. The Reverend had done his job. The marshal had pushed hard from Denver for 3 days, and he brought 4 deputies with him. 5 lawmen, 5 badges. Mackenzie. Prescott swung down from his horse and shook Caleb's hand. He was a man of 44 years with a square jaw and eyes that had seen every lie a man could tell. Calloway told me what you've got. That doctor's report is the most damning thing I've read in 20 years of service. If half of what that boy Noah said is true, then it's all true. Slade is a man with a date with the hangman. He just doesn't know it yet. Prescott pulled a folded paper from his coat. This is a federal warrant from Judge Crawford in Denver. It gives me the authority to search Slade's entire operation, take his records, and remove any child from that place. Not Harlan's court. This here is federal. Forcing children to work is a federal crime. Harlan's power ends where this paper begins. Caleb felt a weight lift off his chest, the first real breath he'd taken in what felt like forever. When do we go? Now. I want to be on that mine before Slade even knows we're coming. They rode hard to the west, 6 men against the snow. Every hour they lost was another hour those kids spent in the dark. Noah had drawn them a map on the back of Rosie's school paper. He'd memorized every tunnel, every guard post, every way out he'd dreamed of, but never took. The main entrance faces south, Caleb told Prescott. 3 guards. Hobbs and Perry are the mean ones. There's a supply entrance on the north side. Noah said it's sometimes left unguarded between midnight and dawn. How many men we looking at? Noah figured 6, counting Slade. But Slade usually only keeps 2 or 3 at the mine, so we might be facing 3, maybe 4 armed men. 6 of us against 4 of them with the law on our side. I've seen worse odds. Prescott gave him a look. You a veteran? 20th Maine. We got diverted to a field hospital near Sharpsburg, spent 3 days hauling stretchers. I saw more misery there than I ever wanted to, until I saw that boy's back. Yeah. They crested the ridge over the mine just as the sun was breaking. Below them, the camp was a scar on the land. In the dim light, little figures were already moving. Children, hauling buckets and tools, shuffling toward the mine shafts like little ghosts. Dear God, one of the deputies muttered. Count them, Prescott ordered. Caleb counted 14 that he could see, with more likely already in the tunnels. The littlest one, a girl with dark hair, stumbled with a bucket too heavy for her. A bigger boy right behind her put a steadying hand on her back. That's Eli, Caleb said, his voice thick. And the little girl must be Sadie. Prescott scanned the camp with his field glasses. 2 guards, one at the main gate, one walking the line. I don't see Slade. Noah said Slade sleeps in the big tent to the east. Prescott turned to his men. Mitchell, Dalton, you take the main entrance. Reeves, Garner, you circle around and cover the north side. Mackenzie, you're with me. We're going straight for Slade. We get him first. Once the head of the snake is cut off, the body stops moving. They moved down the snowy ridge like shadows. Caleb's heart was beating a drum against his ribs, but his hand on the rifle was rock steady. The guard at the main entrance was just a boy himself. When he saw the badges, his rifle dropped to the ground. Federal Marshal. You're under arrest. Hands behind your head. I just work here, mister. Tell it to the judge. The second guard heard the noise and made a run for it, but a deputy tackled him in the snow. Prescott and Caleb got to Slade's tent. The lawman pulled the flap aside and went in, his pistol leading the way. Slade was awake, pulling on his boots. He looked up, saw the badge and the guns, and his face went from surprise to angry in a heartbeat. Morai Slade, you're under arrest by the authority of the United States government. He stood up slow, his eyes locking onto Caleb. Mackenzie. I should have just burned your whole house down. You should have just left that boy alone. That boy is my legal property. You ain't got nothing legal, Prescott said, stepping forward with the irons. Judge Crawford in Denver voided every single one of your guardianship papers this morning. You have no claim on any child here. That's when the mask on Slade's face finally shattered. All the polite smiles he showed in town crumbled away, and underneath was pure, ugly rage. You can't. Harlan signed those papers himself. You have the right to remain silent, Prescott said as the handcuffs clicked shut. I suggest you use it. Caleb turned and walked out of the tent. He didn't need to see any more. He had one thing left to do. The children had stopped their work. They huddled together, watching the lawmen with big, terrified eyes. Caleb searched the faces until he found him, the tall boy, Eli, with one eye still swollen shut. He had his arm around the little girl, Sadie, protecting her. Eli. The boy flinched and pulled her closer, his good eyes sharp with distrust. My name is Caleb Thornan. Your brother Noah is safe at my ranch. He sent me to bring y'all home. Eli stood his ground. The same caution Caleb had seen in Noah was running behind his eyes. You're lying, Eli said, his voice cracking. Noah's gone. Slade is the one who's gone, son. He's in irons and won't be hurting anyone ever again. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a small thing wrapped in a piece of cloth. He unwrapped it and held it out. It was a little wooden horse carved by hand, no more than 2 inches tall. The kind of thing a boy carves to remember what freedom feels like. A little wooden horse. The kind of thing a boy might carve with a stolen knife in the few minutes of peace he got in a day spent deep underground. Eli's composure just shattered. Where did you get this? Noah said you carved it for him, his first week there. You told him it was a magic horse that could run faster than anything, and one day it'd carry him right out of that place. Eli's hand trembled as he took the small carving. He turned it over and over, and 4 years of holding himself together just crumbled. His knees gave out, but Caleb caught him. He's alive, Eli whispered, his voice that of a young boy again, not the tough survivor he'd become. He's really alive. He's alive and he's safe. He's been sleeping in a real bed, eating 3 square meals a day. My own daughter's been teaching him how to play checkers. Eli was openly sobbing now. The little girl, Sadie, hugged his waist tight. She looked up at Caleb, her eyes looking far too old for her face. Are we leaving this place? Yes, sweetheart, y'all are leaving here for good. Promise? I promise. People make promises they don't keep. I know they do, but I'm keeping this one. Agnes showed up 2 hours later with a wagon stocked like she was treating an army. She'd rounded up 3 women from town, including Clara. Agnes moved through those children with a quiet purpose, checking each one, making notes in a ledger of her own. Her hand never shook, even though her jaw was set so tight it looked like it might break. 17 children, she told Caleb. The oldest is 14. The youngest is only 6. Every one of them is underfed and shows signs of being beaten. One boy's lung infection would have taken him inside a month. Then her face hardened. And the graves. We found them behind the trash heap. I counted 9. Prescott's men are starting to dig now. 9. 9 little ones buried without a name, forgotten by the world. The names, Agnes said. We won't know for sure until we get Noah's ledgers. She paused. Caleb, they found the books. Shaft 7, right where Noah said. 6 years of records, names, dates, how they died. Slade kept perfect records, just like it was any other business. Caleb had to walk away. He went to the edge of the camp and just breathed the mountain air until the fire in his own chest died down enough to think straight. He found Eli sitting against a shed with little Sadie asleep in his lap. The boy's face was a mess from crying, but he had that little wooden horse clutched tight in his hand. Eli. Yeah. We're fixing to take you to your brother now. You and Sadie and all the other children. We got wagons with food and plenty of blankets. What about Slade? Slade's headed to Denver in chains. He'll get out. Fellas like him always do. Not this time, son. Eli looked up at him. You can't know that for sure. I know there's a federal marshal, a doctor, and a whole town of folks who are going to make sure he never hurts another child. I know there are 9 graves over there that need answering for. And I know we have 6 years of his own handwritten records proving every last thing he did. Evidence don't always win. No, but it helps. And so does having more than 20 children brave enough to stand up and tell the whole truth. Eli's jaw set, showing the same stubborn streak Caleb had seen in his brother. I'll testify, he said. I'll tell him everything. The wagons full of children left the mine around noon, all of them bundled up in blankets. Prescott and his deputies rode alongside with Slade chained up in the back of a prison wagon. The man had finally gone quiet, his eyes empty, like a man who knows the game is finally over. Caleb rode next to the children's wagon. Eli was up front with Sadie in his lap. The little girl was awake, carefully eating a biscuit Clara had given her. Mr. Thornton, just Caleb, son. Caleb, what's Noah like now? Different how? Well, when I knew him, he never talked much. Didn't trust a soul. I used to tell him stories at night just to help him feel safe, but he was always listening for footsteps, always ready to run. He's still got some of that in him, Caleb admitted. He flinches at loud sounds and eats like he's worried it'll be his last meal. Caleb paused for a moment. But he laughed yesterday. My little girl told a silly joke about a chicken, and he let out a real laugh. It was the first time I'd ever heard it. Eli closed his eyes. He used to laugh all the time, back when our mama was still with us. He'd laugh at anything. I thought I'd never get to hear that sound again. You'll hear it, Caleb said gently. What's your daughter like? Rosie. She's 7 going on 40. Bossy talks a mile a minute and thinks every animal in creation is her personal business. She decided Noah was her brother, about 30 seconds after they met. Eli was quiet for a long while, holding Sadie close as she slept against his chest. He held her just like Noah held Rosie's hand. Like letting go for even a second meant losing the whole world. Caleb, he said finally. Yeah? Noah told you about Sadie, told you. He said you'd take care of her. Eli's arm tightened around the little girl. Her folks are gone. Slade found her wandering on a road near Pueblo. First night at the camp, he put her in the smallest, darkest tunnel. She screamed all night, for 6 long hours. When she finally came out, she didn't speak a word for 3 weeks. I had to carry her everywhere, made sure she ate, just kept her with me. Then one night she started whispering to me. Now she's talking again. She calls me her big brother. Caleb nodded. You are. But she needs a real family, son, not a boy stretched thin, taking care of himself. Well, she's got one, if you'll have it. Eli looked up, confused. What's that supposed to mean? I mean, my ranch has a loft big enough for 4 kids. I mean, we've got fresh eggs every morning and a good dog who'll sleep on your feet. My own daughter has been praying for a bigger family. You'd take Sadie, too? I'd take all of y'all if that's what you want. Eli just stared, working it out in his head. Caleb saw the same question Noah always had. Is this real? What's the catch? Why? Eli finally asked. You don't owe us a thing. I owe your brother everything. He reminded me what it feels like to care about something. For 5 years, I've been walking through life like a ghost, a day. Your brother Noah woke me up. The wagons kept moving through the snow. Behind them, the mine was just a bad memory on the mountain, a scar that would fade. They got to Burden Creek as the sun went down, and the whole town was waiting. Folks lined the street, quiet at first. Then one person started clapping, then another, until the whole town was making a welcome noise. Clara was there, Reverend Calloway, and a dozen other faces, all standing in the snow. But Caleb was only looking for 2. He saw them on Clara's porch. Noah stood there, holding the railing tight, his eyes searching the wagon. Rosie was right beside him, just about jumping out of her boots. The wagon stopped. Caleb helped Eli down, the boy's legs shaking. Noah came off that porch slow at first, and then he was running. He ran through the snow with his arms wide open, all the walls he'd built just gone. The brothers came together right in the middle of the street, falling into the snow, holding on to each other. The sound Eli made was 4 years of fear and sadness just pouring out of him. It wasn't crying and it wasn't laughing, just a sound of pure relief. "You're alive," Eli kept saying. "You're alive." "I told you I was coming back," Noah sobbed into his brother's coat. "You didn't come back. You sent someone better." Noah pulled away and saw his brother's bruised face. "He hurt you." "I'm fine. He hurt you on account of me." "He hurt me because he's a monster," Eli said, holding Noah's face. "Not because of you. You got out. That's all that ever mattered." Rosie walked right up to them, tears on her cheeks. "Hi, I'm Rosie. I'm Noah's sister now, so I guess that makes me your sister too. Daddy says Sadie can stay with us, so we're all a family now." Eli looked at this little girl so sure of herself. And just like that, love was something you just decided on. Caleb watched his family come together in that snowy street with the whole town looking on. 4 broken, brave children bound together by tragedy and sheer grit. Agnes came up beside him. "You know the hearing is still set for tomorrow." "I know. Slade's lawyer is screaming bloody murder, saying Prescott had no right. Prescott had a federal warrant. Harlan don't care. He's saying the warrant was improper and he's fixing to let Slade walk on a technicality." A cold feeling washed over Caleb. Can he do that? He can sure try. But Caleb, we have the ledgers, the pictures, and 9 fresh graves. We've got 17 witnesses and a federal marshal who ain't backing down. And Harlan's got 20 years on the bench and a whole lot of pride. Then we better be ready for a fight. Caleb looked at the children, Noah and Eli still holding each other, Rosie with Satai in her lap. He saw all the other children being taken into homes all over town. "Agnes," he said, "how much truth do you need before folks can't ignore it anymore?" "More than you think, but less than Slade's got." She gave his arm a squeeze. "Get some rest, Caleb. Tomorrow's going to be a long one." He gathered his children, all 4 of them, and drove them home in the dark. Eli held Noah and Rosie held Sadie. Back at the cabin, Caleb carried Sadie inside. She was light as a feather. He laid her in the loft next to Rosie. Eli and Noah climbed up after, and Caleb could hear them whispering, catching up on 4 lost years. He sat at his kitchen table, the same one where he'd sat alone for 5 years talking to a ghost. But tonight, the cabin felt different. It felt full. It felt alive. It felt just like it used to, back when Martha was still here, before the sickness took her and the quiet settled in for good. He quietly said her name. "Martha, I have 4 kids now." He knew she would laugh at him, since he could barely fix breakfast for 2. He could almost feel her presence, that warmth she always carried. He checked the rifle and the revolver, then all the locks, including the new bolt he put on after the barn fire. Tomorrow he would walk into a courtroom. He had to fight a judge who hated being wrong and a system that failed 26 kids over 6 years. He wasn't sure he could win, but he knew every person who stood on that street clapping and crying would be right there with him. He knew 4 children were sleeping upstairs, safe for the first time in a long, long time. That was worth fighting any judge in any courtroom. Caleb laid his head on the table and slept, truly slept, for the first time in 5 years. The courthouse was already packed when he arrived. He wore his Navy suit, the same one from his wedding and from Martha's funeral. It smelled of cedar and sorrow. His hands shook a little, not from fear, but from the weight of it all. Rosie had tied the red ribbon he bought her into her hair. She looked up at him with her mother's eyes and said, "We are going to win, Daddy." He replied, "That is the plan." Noah and Eli walked right behind him. Noah had finally put on some weight, but Eli still favored his left side where his ribs had not healed properly. Sadie held Eli's hand, her eyes scanning the crowd with a stillness that no child should ever have to learn. When Clara met them at the courthouse door, the news hit Caleb like a punch to the gut. Harlan was here. The same judge who signed the papers that turned children into Slade's property was now running the hearing. Inside, the whole town was packed shoulder to shoulder, a sea of tense faces. Slade sat at his table, looking smug in his prison clothes, but his confidence seemed brittle, like a man who knew the tide had turned against him. His lawyer looked like he had not slept in a week. Caleb's lawyer, Samuel Graves, was a sight to see. 70 years old and thin as a fence post with eyes that saw right through a man. Caleb asked him straight, "How bad is it?" Graves did not mince words. "Harlan's a problem. He's protecting himself. If he says those papers are good, it means he never made a mistake, and judges hate admitting they were wrong." Judge Harlan came in then, a man in his mid-60s with a face that said he had been right for 40 years and was not about to change his mind now. His gaze passed over the room and landed on the children. Harlan started right in, questioning the federal warrant Prescott used to raid the mine. Prescott stood his ground. "Your Honor, that warrant was based on sworn testimony of abuse and photographic evidence of forced labor." Harlan's voice turned to ice. "Forced labor of minors is a federal crime, Your Honor, regardless of any state papers." The judge shot back, "That is for me to decide." Then he dropped the hammer. If he found the warrant was improper, all the evidence, every photograph, every record would be thrown out. A cold dread filled the room. But then old Graves stood up. "Your Honor, before we argue about warrants, I ask the court to hear from the children themselves. Their experiences are not evidence to be seized. They are human beings with stories to tell. You cannot silence them." Harlan's jaw tightened, but he agreed. "I call Eli Ward," Graves said. Young Eli walked to the stand, his small hands clenched into fists. He put his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, his voice clear as a bell. Graves asked gently, "Eli, tell the judge what happened at the mine." Eli looked straight at Judge Harlan. "We worked underground, 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. The little ones had to crawl into the tightest tunnels. If a shaft collapsed, you either dug yourself out or you died." He paused. 3 kids died that way. When asked about getting hurt, Eli was blunt. "If you could not work, you did not eat. If you complained, Slade put you in the hole, a 6-foot pit in the ground. No food, no water. I was in there 3 days once, just for looking at him wrong." "Did children die at the mine?" Graves asked. "Yes, sir," Eli said, his voice flat and hard. "I can name them." He listed them off. Thomas, who suffocated in a collapse. Mary, who died of pneumonia while Slade called her a faker. James, who Slade beat so badly he died 2 days later. 9 children in total that he knew of. When Graves asked about little Sadie, Eli's voice finally cracked. "She was 6 when they brought her. I took care of her. I couldn't protect my own brother, Noah. Slade told me he'd killed Noah, and that it was my fault." The other lawyer, Cross, stood up. "Mr. Ward, is it not true that Mr. Slade provided you food and shelter?" Eli's answer was sharp. "A prison provides that too. That does not make it a kindness." Then Cross made his mistake. "Are you not exaggerating because you were disciplined?" In response, Eli pulled up his shirt. The whole courtroom gasped. His small body was a road map of scars, bruises, and wrongly healed bones. "Does this look like discipline to you?" he asked. Cross just turned away, defeated. He walked back to his table and did not ask another question. Then Graves called Noah to the stand. "Noah, you heard what your brother said, is it true?" The boy's voice was clear. "Every word. Is there anything you would like to add?" Noah looked straight at Judge Harlan. "Your Honor, you are the one who signed the papers. The papers that let Mr. Slade take us. Maybe he fooled you just like he fooled us. But you know the truth now. You have heard what he did. You know about the children who are gone." The courtroom was dead silent. "I am only 9 years old," Noah said. "I cannot make you do the right thing. But I'm asking you, please do not send us back. Please do not let a piece of paper matter more than our lives." Judge Harlan just stared at the boy, and for a moment something like shame crossed his face. Agnes was called next. She laid out the medical facts like a surgeon. 37 lash marks, broken ribs, bruises, burns, and starvation. The list of injuries went on for 20 minutes. Then they called Caleb to the stand. He sat down and found his children's faces in the crowd. "Mr. Mackenzie, why did you take Noah Ward into your home?" He answered, "Because my daughter asked me to, and because I saw in him every person I had ever failed." His voice cracked. "I spent 5 years just getting through the day after my wife Martha died. That boy woke me up. He reminded me that some things are worth fighting for." "What will you do if the court rules against you?" "I will fight it," Caleb said, his voice firm. "Every appeal, every legal way I can. And if you run out of legal options?" Caleb looked the judge square in the eye. "Then I will do what any father would do. I will protect my children even if it means breaking the law. I watched boys younger than Eli die for the idea that no person should be another's property. If the law says I have to send these children back to that kind of life, then the law is wrong." The judge called for a 30-minute recess. It was the longest 30 minutes of Caleb's life. The children gathered around him, a tight little circle of hope and fear. Rosie sat on his lap. "Daddy, what if he says no?" she whispered. "Then we keep fighting." Noah put a hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens, you gave us this time. You gave us a family. Nobody can take that away." Eli nodded. "He is right. Even if the worst happens, we had this." Caleb pulled all 4 of them close. They were his children. The ones he had chosen and the ones who had chosen him. No judge could ever undo that. When they were called back, the courtroom was silent as Judge Harlan took his seat. "I have considered the testimony," he began, "and I have spent the last 30 minutes examining my own conscience, something I should have done 3 years ago. 3 years ago," the judge continued, "Morai Slade came to me with a convincing story about helping orphans. I signed the guardianship papers without looking deeper. That failure is mine, and I will live with it forever." His voice trembled just a little. "I cannot bring back the 9 children who died. I cannot give these children back the years they lost. The law does not have that kind of power." He paused, then looked directly at Slade. "But I can do this. I hereby declare that every single guardianship paper signed by this court for Morai Slade is void. They were based on lies and used for criminal acts. They are the worst abuse of this legal system I have seen in my 40 years on the bench." Slade jumped up. "You can't do that." "Sit down, Mr. Slade," the judge ordered, "or I will have you gagged." The judge then turned to Caleb's lawyer. "Furthermore, I am granting Jesse Mackenzie's petition for permanent custody of Noah Ward." Judge Harlan looked right at Caleb. "And based on what I've heard today, I am extending that custody to include Eli Ward and the little girl known as Sadie." Rosie let out a scream of pure 7-year-old joy that filled the entire room. She grabbed Noah, who grabbed Eli, who reached for Sadie, and all 4 of them ended up in a laughing, crying heap on the floor. It was the sound of heartbreak finally giving way to happiness. After a moment, the judge continued. "Mr. Slade, as for the federal charges, Marshal Prescott's warrant stands. Your appeal will be heard, but you will make it from a jail cell." He then turned to the marshal. "Please remove Mr. Slade from my courtroom. I do not want to see his face again." The deputies led Slade away in chains. His head was down, the charming mask he always wore now gone for good. There was no rage left in the man, just the emptiness of someone who built a life on being cruel and found out it couldn't last. As Slade passed their table, he stopped and looked at Noah. The boy met his gaze head on. "You ruined me," Slade said. "No, sir." Noah's voice was steady. "You ruined yourself. I just told the truth." They led Slade away, and the courtroom just erupted. Folks were clapping and crying. Clara was sobbing, and Agnes had tears on her face. Caleb stood right in the middle of it, holding his children, feeling all that joy wash over him. 5 years of silence and grief were finally over. They walked out of that courthouse into the sunshine. For the first time in weeks, the snow sparkled. People lined the steps, shaking his hand, touching the children's shoulders, their voices a long, warm welcome. The ride home was loud. Rosie planned their whole Christmas. Noah and Eli sat shoulder to shoulder, quiet but together. Sadie, sitting in Rosie's lap, said one word the whole way: home. That's right, Rosie said. Home. The cabin came into view as the sun was setting. Caleb stopped the wagon and just looked at it. The same cabin he'd built with his own 2 hands, the same porch where he'd sat alone for 5 long years. But it looked different now. It looked bigger, brighter, as if the house itself had been waiting for enough people to make it a home. Everybody out, Caleb said. Chores aren't going to do themselves. They all scattered. Rosie took Sati to see the chickens and Noah went to feed the horses. Eli just stood in the yard, taking it all in. Eli. Yeah? Welcome home, son. Eli's jaw tightened, and he blinked hard against the feeling in his eyes. I do not know how to do any of this normal life stuff, how to be a family. Eli admitted it plain. Caleb looked at the boy and understood. Neither do I. My biscuits are a sin, and I have been wearing the same 2 shirts for 5 years. We will just have to learn it all together. What if I make a mess of things? Eli asked. You will. So will I. So will Rosie. That is just how families are. Nothing about it is easy, but I hear it is worth it. Eli looked at the little ranch house, at the horses, and at Rosie chasing a chicken. He saw his brother Noah pumping water, his arms getting stronger. He watched an old hound dog named Biscuit mosey on over to check on them. Caleb, Eli said, that little girl Sadie is going to need a lot of help. She does not sleep through the night and screams from bad dreams. We will just have to be quiet at the table then, Caleb said. She is scared of the dark. We will keep a lamp burning. She may never be normal. Who is? Caleb put a firm hand on his shoulder. She has 4 people who love her now. That is a fine start. We will figure out the rest as it comes. That night, Caleb cooked supper for 5 people. He burned the biscuits and filled the house with smoke. Rosie declared that her daddy's cooking was the real disaster and they should send for help. Noah laughed. A real, honest-to-goodness laugh. The sound was so strange and wonderful that it filled the whole cabin. Eli's head whipped around to look at his brother. He had not heard that sound in 4 long years and figured he never would again. Sadie ate a whole plate of food. She took small, slow bites, but she cleaned her plate. When she finished, she pushed it forward and whispered something so quiet Eli had to lean in. She wants to know if there is more. There is always more, Caleb promised her. Every single night, for the rest of your life. After supper, Rosie read from her book about horses. Eli and Noah played a game of checkers using bottle caps on a board Caleb had carved. Sadie sat on the floor, gently stroking Biscuit's head as it rested in her lap. The old dog stayed perfectly still, knowing this quiet little girl needed him. This was the life his wife Martha had wanted, not the grief and the silence. This loud, messy, wonderful life, a house full of folks who needed one another. He dried his hands and stepped out onto the porch. The stars were brilliant in the black Colorado sky. The cold air bit at his skin. The door opened behind him, and he heard the footsteps of all 4 children. We want to see the stars, Rosie announced. All of us. They laid blankets on the frozen wood and stretched out together. 5 people and a fat old dog under a sky that never ended. Rosie pointed out the stars she knew and gave names to the ones she did not. Noah asked quiet questions about the heavens that no man could answer. Eli lay with an arm around Sadie, who just stared up at the sky, seeing it for the first time in 8 months, without a ceiling over her head. Caleb, Noah whispered, do you think Mama can see us? Caleb thought of all the years he had missed Martha, of all the nights he had talked to her ghost out on this same porch and only got silence back. Yes, he said, I think she can. What do you reckon she would say? She would say it surely took me long enough. Eli let out a soft laugh. Rosie giggled. Even Sadie made a tiny sound. "Caleb," Eli said next, "thank you for coming for us, for fighting for us when it would have been easier to just walk on by. For all of it. You do not have to thank me, son." "Yes, I do. Because for 4 years, nobody came. Nobody fought for us. Nobody even looked our way. Then you showed up with a bad leg and a rifle and a 7-year-old girl, and you changed our whole world." "Rosie changed everything," Caleb said. "I just drove the wagon." "Daddy, you did more than that," Rosie mumbled, half asleep. "You saved them." "They saved me right back," he thought. One by one, the children drifted off to sleep. Noah was last, fighting to stay awake and keep watch out of old habit. But soon his eyes closed too. Caleb lay there under the stars, with his family breathing all around him. 4 children the world had thrown away. 4 children who had seen things no one ever should. 4 children who had found each other, and then found him, and decided they were all worth fighting for. He thought of all the people he could not save. Then he thought of the ones he finally did. It all started with a simple question Rosie had asked him in a snowy town square, a question that broke his lonely life apart and built something new and better from the pieces. "Daddy, can we take him home?" Yes. The answer was always going to be yes. Caleb closed his eyes. The wind whispered through the prairie grass, and the children breathed in time with it. In a small house on a Colorado ranch in the winter of 1887, a family that should not have existed slept together under a sky full of light. They were whole, and they were built from nothing more than stubbornness and love. That was more than enough.